All right, everybody, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Happy New Year. This is my first meeting of 2024. We had our third son back in January, so thank you everybody for the text messages and the DMs on Facebook. Excited about this guest today. So I don't know how to describe a superhuman. Like what do you get when you put together an architect and then somebody that's certified in building codes and somebody that's certified in floodplains and then put in years with the city of New Orleans in the mean streets of Orleans Parish doing permitting and things like that. Only mutant that can be birthed is Zach Smith. So we happy to have him today. So everybody put your hands together for Zach Smith. Thank you for coming out. You had to be like one of the most requested guests. So it wasn't like one person or two people. It was like multiple people that asked if I knew you and when you were coming. Not if you were coming, but when you were coming. So thank you for fitting us into your schedule. And I'm excited about tonight. So let's start from the beginning. So how does Zach Smith even get to where Zach Smith is now? Like the permitting, the architecture, what's that story like?
Well, first off, thank you guys for coming out tonight. It's always an honor to get an invitation to come speak with any group. And, you know, I actually had a double header today, just got to speak to some undergrads at the Tulane School, at Tulane University. The School of Architecture has expanded upon its master's program for real estate development, and they've started an undergraduate program. And this is the first semester it's been really offered to undergrads. So it's gaining and gaining and gaining. So before we kind of go on that kind of history tour or the history lesson, just a fundamental idea, concept that I have is that I see just too much. I'm gonna hold it? Just bring it closer, okay. Is that better? Wonderful. Yeah. You know, this is kind of just a theory of mine, a thesis, but I've been seeing development from a couple different angles that people just haven't really seen with the government background, which we'll go through, is that there's just not enough people that are development oriented. They're not development minded. I've been to enough neighborhood participation meetings where the first thing somebody does, they literally show up to a project to be in opposition because they think that something happening in their neighborhood is going to immediately equate to, well, my property value is at stake. And it's a conversation we just had at Tulane. You know, what's the most expensive square footage in the country? It's Manhattan, New York. Does Manhattan have a lot of people or does it have a few people? Does it have a lot of activity or does it have a little activity? And so, you know, yeah, there's certain bad activities that are going to be bad for any neighborhood, but it's a rare occasion. And so being able to participate in this process, it's something that I embraced when I had my days at City Hall. It's something that I really feel strongly about and advocating is there need to be more people in these rooms. There need to be more people saying, you know what, we need to let so-and-so do something, especially if we're sitting up here and we drive around. In this particular case, I can really only talk about real estate in New Orleans because it's where I'm from, it's where I'm born, it's what I've been doing professionally for over a third of my life. I think it's fair to say, especially if we ask you to raise your hands, do you think we're going in the right direction, or do you think like the status quo is like just fantastic? I don't think a lot of people in this room or a lot of people outside of this room would say, you know what, we should just keep on the same track we're going on. And that's including Gretna, that's including Jefferson, that's definitely including Orleans. Well, one of the fundamental ways to change that and create different opportunities for jobs and for people just to live in better places is through development of some sort. Nobody lives in a house without somebody to have that idea, whether it's an individual homeowner who just wants to provide for themselves, or whether it's somebody who wants to build 600 houses at one time. Somebody had to have that idea. Somebody had to put together the capital for it. Somebody had to figure out the permitting process, and you have to move forward. If we don't have enough people doing that, people don't appreciate that kind of trial that this group has to go through. And we don't really move that needle forward because, again, there's this misinformation out there that development somehow equates to a disruption of people's lives or their livelihoods. I say look around, drive around Southeast Louisiana. I kind of want it to be disrupted a little bit more than it's being disrupted right now. And so that's a fundamental kind of which direction, what North Star am I aiming at? And it's, let's break a couple things in a good way so that we can rebuild them in a better way. It's not just going and cleaning out or mass demolitions of neighborhoods. But I mean, you guys, I would imagine with a show of hands, everybody in here's fixed up a piece of property that has not been loved in decades, right? It's probably sometimes the easiest entry because it's the most unloved property. Without you guys in here, there'd be more blight in the city.
So tell us what does day one look like for you to have that ideology, which is much appreciated, and it's a lens that you got, from your experience. So like from the very beginning, was this born in you, or you saw something when you first started in Orleans Parish that led you to this ideology?
So to get back on kind of the history of how did I get to the table here and the invite here to talk, I was in architecture school at the University of Miami. I spent the last 3 summers, which were all the post-Katrina summers, working for a company called Wink Engineering. They had offices in Covington, Baton Rouge. They had a huge office in St. Rose. They did a lot of petrochemical stuff. And they had a small fledgling architecture kind of group inside of it was 600 something engineers throughout the state. And it was only, I think, 4 or 5 architects. And the week before I got out of college, one of the principals called and said, I got good news and I got bad news. And I always take the bad news first. That was born into me. And he says, well, the bad news is I can't hire you because the company just got sold to a Texas firm. And I was like, well, what's the good news? I don't have to fire you, And I looked at it as a glass half full, even more half full. Had I been 2 years older, I knew I would have had a house by then. I would have had payments and potentially been let go. And just because of circumstances completely outside of our ability to control. And what ended up happening was a family friend called who had experience and had worked in city government, said, hey, they have this position at City Hall in the permits office. I think you should take it. You need an architecture degree. And I think in 5 years, you're going to run the place. And in 5 years and 2 months, I was the building official. So he was pretty spot on.
And this is New Orleans?
New Orleans City Hall. I was 23 when I started at City Hall. I was 5 when I got out.
Okay.
And I never went to school thinking I'd work in public service. I advocate that everybody should work in government. You have a different appreciation for how the world kind of works in its own little way. I would tell you, there's probably a lot of folks in here that espouse the government's too much in my way. There's too much government, too much regulation. I would tell you for every one person that's in this room, there's 9 people out of this room that want more government, more regulation, less ability to do stuff. So again, that's why it's a numbers game. It's a numbers game. It's a voting game. But I just loved almost every minute of City Hall. Really got to excel and thrive. I know, we can make some jokes. The bars were a little low, but I was in the right place at the right time. I was in a spot where people in front of me were retiring out, and there was that natural ability to go up in the civil service kind of world. But I really just enjoyed, and it's something that I miss to this day. I'm almost 3 years in the private sector, and I miss to the day the ability to help on a massive scale everybody with their problems.
What did you see during your time with Orleans Parish, like as far as how does government view developers? Because we developers, we know how we view government. So what do we look like to them from what you saw during your time in office?
So before I jump into that, I'd say, and that's something that I think also has to change a little bit. And it's part of what we're going to talk about tonight, is I think that there needs to be an improved view of what government's doing. There's a colleague of mine that, helped flip the script. This was when I was still in government, so he may have been saying it to me to some degree. But, if you look at folks in government as free consultants, it may really change your perspective on how you interact with them. Yes, they're there to enforce. Yes, there's some regulation, but I would say in the decade plus at City Hall, I gave out the equivalent of probably $10 million worth of free advice to every project, from tiny little garage addition all the way up to Four Seasons renovations. So if you try and flip that script and look at it as a partnership, or you look at it as some way that we can work together to that end, it helps, because there's a phrase that I think I coined called the City Hall effect. Anybody gone to City Hall and been real happy when they got out of bed thinking about their trip to City Hall? Right?
Which City Hall?
Yeah, any City Hall.
Oh.
Any City Hall. Anybody ever been like, I'm going to go to government today. You know what? I'm going to pay all this money, and I'm going to get a little piece of paper, or hell, I'm going to probably pay a lot of money, and they're not even going to give me the piece of paper today. They're going to make me wait 3 weeks for it. So you're agitated when you get up, your blood pressure's up, and you go into City Hall, and trust me, sometimes you just get returned to you the same kind of energy that you bring into that place. And so it's something where I would say overall, I don't think anybody in government. Yeah, look, there's bad apples everywhere. Has anybody in this room ever fired an employee who wasn't cutting it? I have. Imagine being in a place where it's very hard to fire employees that don't cut it. So you're working with some of that. But also imagine that you're in a place where everybody brings their bad energy to you and expects you to just return it with smiles and rainbows and marshmallows. And then gets agitated when you're having a bad day yourself, or when you're like, I'm not putting up with your stuff today. So I would say, to answer your question in the most direct way I can, I think that there is a misunderstanding about the role that developers and development plays in the city, and how you can't have a healthy city without a healthy development environment. At the same time, though, if you ever feel that your project's being picked on or anything like that, I would fundamentally say people in City Hall don't have enough time to focus on your project in that sort of negative way. They get up, they go to work to try and get stuff moving. And one of the things I know that's going to be a topic for tonight is potentially how to make that faster for them. Because if you make it faster for them, you make it faster for yourself. And a fundamental way to do that is resist the urge to over-communicate with City Hall. Anybody ever badgered somebody? I know I was on the receiving end of this by a couple of you people in the room. Where, hey, my project, I'm on a deadline. I got to get this through. So I'm going to call you every 7 minutes until I get this. I'm going to call, and I'm going to text, and I'm going to email, and I'm going to show up, and I'm going to call more, and I'm going to text more. Remember, imagine there's 60,000 permits written or applied for in any given calendar year. If every applicant for each of those projects would reduce their email to City Hall by 1 email, if every project just reduced their emails by 1, you're talking about 60,000 fewer emails sent to 70 employees who are in the permits office. Out of those 70 employees, about 25 of them you'll never see, because they're back of house, they're maybe field people, or they're folks that are in the administration side. So that's 60,000 emails divided by 50. That's a lot of emails fewer per person. Now imagine if every project would reduce its emails to the city by 2. The incessant kind of need to get an update because your project or my project is the most important is actually slowing down, in my opinion, all of our projects. Everybody in this room is slowing the process down for everybody else, including themselves. Hey, I want to get my application in 6 weeks before the mechanical plans are even finished. I'm here to tell you, you're not going to get a permit faster that way. You're going to get certain comments back sooner, but you're not really changing the outcome of when you get that permit. Resist the urge to check in every minute, and resist the urge to apply until you're actually ready. A question that came earlier was, do you think I can get my permit in a week? And I said, we get permits regularly in 3-4 days when they are these interior kind of non-structural renovations, and the application from Johnny goes in with all the information. Check, it's out. Unless somebody's sick or there's a holiday, etc. Obviously, when it's a little bit more complicated project, that starts to stretch. But when we turn in one piece of paper at a time, the number of touches that City Hall has to have, we're slowing the city down on our own project, and we're slowing it down on a macro scale on everybody else's project.
So what do you describe as best practices in preparation, right? So a developer could imagine that I'm being prepared with everything that my architect gave me. I have my estimates, I have my application, and I should be good to go. What's normally, from what you see, what's normally the most overlooked steps that developers do that can slow the project down? So normally we go through a checklist that the city gives us on the website. So where's the gap that you normally see from what's on the website versus like what the developers actually turn in normally, or most frequent mistakes?
I think the most frequent mistake is not having signatures on documents. You know, somebody who they weren't properly prepared for their application, so they have their general contractor's estimate that's not signed by anybody, it's not executed, so they submit it. It's very good information, helps me plug in what your costs are. I can tell you to the penny what your permit fee is going to be, but I can't actually accept your contract because it's not signed by you, it's not signed by your contractor, it's not dated, it doesn't have all the pieces and parts. So it's the document, but it's an incomplete document. And in the government world, an incomplete document is not having the document at all. A separate part that seems to catch up a lot more projects, and it's due to the city actually being very good about this these days, is addressing. It's, you know, if you're doing anything that's multifamily or anything that's got 2 units on it, you know, and when I said multifamily originally, I'm thinking 3s and 4s and 5s, but even doubles. In the city of New Orleans specifically, go on Property Viewer. You know, if you guys, everybody in the room knows property.nola.gov?
We do now.
You do now. Okay. We'll talk
What is
about
it?
that.
Property.nola.gov?
Property.nola.gov.
Okay.
I do work in multiple parishes in the state. I do work in different states. I do work in other cities outside of this state. The property.nola.gov website is in the top 3. This state and our city can be in the bottom of many polls and whatever. We have one of the best zoning websites, hands down. Property.nola.gov. You can search up a property. If you're ever looking for, we don't have a visual in here, but if you were trying to check out the zoning on a property, you can easily figure it out, at least the basics of it. And you can also, if you're ever saying, you know what, I got a client who's really looking to invest and they want to build a hotel, but I don't know where, you know, what areas of town we should be looking at. If you know the zoning, you know, ordinance, and you know what zoning districts allow for hotels, you can actually turn on the color-coded key on property.nola.gov, and you can see visually all the zoning districts that would allow for hotels. This works really well when people are trying to do industrial stuff, because the color purple is basically heavy industrial throughout, and you can see it. Follow along Chef Mentor, you can see it across Jordan Avenue, you can see it right next to the Superdome by the railroad tracks and everything, and you immediately say, I'm no longer under a NDA on it, so I can kind of talk about it. We're doing solar farms. Well, you need to know where you can do it. You pop up, and you pop up the map, and I can send that regionally to some people, and they're able to then go start putting offers in on property without having to go individually. Hey, is 1, 2, 3, 4 Maple Street allowed for that? Is 5, 6, 7, 8 allowed for that? No, you can get it to. You can just get people in the right neighborhoods to start looking because they understand that. You got a client that wants to build only sixplexes. There's a good chunk of the city that you can't build a sixplex in. Well, let's figure out the zoning districts you can build a sixplex in, and then let's turn on the map, turn on the colors, figure out what that is, and now you can jump to it without having a needle in a haystack. You can go just find the haystack and just root through it because you're going to find a bunch of needles that way. You had another part to that.
I think you pretty much answered the question, but I also noticed on your website so many different role players as far as your team, as far as government compliance, managing permits, and then you being architect. What does that dynamic look like when a file comes through your office and all of those hands have to touch it? Like, why so many people in that many roles are necessary to push a project to the finish line?
Well, that's a good question. So just a little bit about our company. So at Zach Smith Consulting and Design, we're a full service architectural firm doing anything from shed additions and garage fix-ups to, I think the biggest project we have on our desk right now is a 75-unit apartment complex for New Orleans. So we're doing from small to big, commercial, etc. What we also have, I'll call it the other half of our company, is permit expediting and liaising. And permit expediting does not mean, hey, Zach was the building official, so for whatever his fee is, he can get it done in 24 hours. It's we're going to package all your stuff and make sure your paperwork's right, and we're going to get it generally faster than the rest of the free world, but because we've done it the right way, not because we've just called and said, hey, give me my permit. And we tend to ask questions in a more complete way, I find, than somebody who didn't have 10 plus years in City Hall. The other part that we work on is things like land use consulting. You know, I got in trouble with the HDLC because I tore off too much of the front facade, so now I have to go to the public hearing to get yelled at, and I may have to pay some fines. We represent you in that. We will work on zoning changes. We'll work on conditional uses. We'll work on text amendments. Anywhere all over the city, we do that. You know, Jefferson Parish as well, St. Bernard, St. Tammany. Just for what it's worth, in case this question just happened to come up earlier, Plaquemines, I do no private work in Plaquemines because I'm the actual building official for Plaquemines Parish. So I do no private work. So you get free answers from me in Plaquemines. But how it works and why it works is that we have people that can focus on their different roles. I would tell you something that just nobody does it better than us because nobody even does it, is our architects love the fact that they get to be architects and they don't have to get down into the weeds of the permits. And it's really been beneficial to us internally for our internal timelines on projects because we're able to get that permit application in and start working on stuff before. When we come to our conditional uses and our land use stuff, deadlines are deadlines are deadlines. If you have a deadline for an application at 5 p.m. on a Monday and you're late, you potentially have to wait a whole nother month. We work our schedules around it by having all of those pieces and parts to where we have the design team work with our permitting team. As it relates to the specialties there, though, I find it's impossible to have 5 people, 6 people, 7 people, 10 people that are going to be an expert all the time on every person's project, because you're having to manage client relationships, you're having to manage government relationships, you're having to manage the actual workflow. And so if you had it to where it was this super designer who was also a permit expert, there's just too many eggs in one basket, in my opinion. And you're subject to somebody being sick, you're subject to somebody being out, and you're having somebody do too much of stuff. So the flexibility of the office, I think, is gone. Yeah. So it was really important to us, and it seems to have been a good direction we went in, which is having people that can handle these different processes internally so that we can meet and beat our expectations when it comes to timeliness. But it's something that our staff, and I know we're being recorded and we have a kid in the room, so I won't say I have a hiring principle, which is you're available to be hired as long as you lack the capacity to be so I won't say it. And that's our number one focus of how we hire people, and it's so far we've been pretty darn good with it. The second is people, do you want to do more than in 1 year or 2 years or 5 years than what we hired you to do? And I find that our whole team, the architects want to know more about this, our permit team wants to know about our architecture. We do a lot of sit-ins where people can just better understand the process overall. So it's been very rewarding and very helpful to have different players all on the same project, where you can have 3 or 4 people that you as an owner, as a client, you might interact with 4 different staff members for us who are all doing their part to get your project across the finish line.
So you described what should be our perception of government, which was very good. I never looked at it that way, that you can get free advice from government, which is good. From what you saw, let's flip the script. So how does government look at developers? Because we assume, from those city council meetings, they look at us as the greedy developers that, just want our way and want to throw money around. So how does government view us as developers, what should we be prepared for with that perception?
Well, aren't you a greedy developer that just throws money around?
I'm not.
Okay. Okay. Well, you're the only one in the room. You're the only one in the room that's not. Unfortunately, this is where there is a reality. Again, I don't think on the bureaucratic level, in any permits office, city planning office, HDLC office, the tax office, whoever, of folks just wanting to put the thumb on. The system, though, the entity of government, I don't think has a dislike of development, but it doesn't have a good understanding of development. It doesn't understand the role that healthy development can play to really grow the tax base, to really grow the job potential. And part of that is because, anybody in here ever gone to a city council meeting for a project of theirs?
Yeah.
I see a couple hands nod. Anybody in this room ever gone to a city council meeting not for a project of their own? In support or in opposition of a project? In support. Was it somebody you knew? You just showed up as a citizen. That's like, you should buy a lottery ticket, because that's the odds of really seeing that in the real world. And that comes from the majority of people's interaction with developers is usually an isolated deal where you're sitting in a public meeting and words like, well, you know, they should appreciate what I'm doing because the money and this, that, and the other. That's a phrase that you should forget. Even though it's real, even though it's mathematically true, it sometimes just doesn't land very well. In fact, 98% of the time, it doesn't land very well. You know, the money, and I'm investing a lot of money, especially if it's compared to somebody's inaccurate feeling that somehow your development's going to cause damage to their house. You could be investing $1 trillion. They don't care. And so one of the reasons why, again, I think the development community is misunderstood is the development community is not doing enough to educate the world about the good that happens. And the development community doesn't support the development community enough. As an architect, I get on the AIA a lot, and the AIA has started to change the direction of its ship to start participating in the legislative process more and more and more.
The AIA is what? Just
AIA, the American Institute of Architects.
Okay, all right.
Anybody a realtor in here? I know there's a couple of realtors. How many? I know they're going through some stuff up in DC, but the NRA, the NAR, National Association of Realtors, until very recently was very powerful on a federal level. How many times have they gone to council meetings here? At any Jefferson Parish, I know the official office is over there on the Service Road in Metairie. How many meetings have they gone to lobby for less regulation or better regulation on policies in government? Local level is where 98% of all the stuff that actually matters to us on a day-to-day level happens. And it's just where things go. So it's why you go to a project. Emile, you go to get, and I see Corey in the back, so I'll pick on Corey. Corey goes to City Hall to work on a project, and, you know, again, he shows up by himself, or he shows up with 1 or 2 people that are paid assassins like me, and you maybe have 6 or 7 or 8 neighbors who are kind of against a project. Again, because the world doesn't understand what you guys are doing, the positives about job creation or investment or whatever are generally lost because of this perception that, well, you're only here because you're going to make money on it, you know, which factually speaking is true. Like, you know, you didn't just say, most people don't just go want to fix up property. They want to fix up property and they want to make money. And there's nothing wrong with those two things. One of the issues, though, is that nobody's talking about the narrative about why it's important and why it's needed. And so, hey, why does City Hall not understand what we do, or why do they not appreciate? Because nobody's saying the story. Everybody's, you know, they're saying the story only when it matters on my one project and when I have a little skin in the game, and people immediately discount that because, oh, he's just saying that or she's just saying it because, you know, they're greedy. When you start showing up like Marcel and just speaking on behalf of other people's projects, hey, I'm here, I'm just a citizen, I live a couple blocks away, or, you know, I'm a developer too, and this is great, or here's a off the Here's a pro forma where we can actually talk about to the penny the taxes we think this thing's going to generate in a year or 10 years or whatever, I think the needle changes. But it's very time consuming, which means it costs a lot of money to do that. But I would urge this group, I'd urge folks that are realtors to push their associations to start showing up with their feet to some of these things to educate people about what you do and why it's important. There's so many realtors and developers and architects and engineers and builders and contractors and electricians in the city. But because they're, this is going to sound a little negative, because they're actually out working and doing stuff, they can't always participate in some of these processes unless it's their individual job. But I would challenge each of you and all of the people that you work with, work for, work under you, to show up to these meetings and speak on behalf of other people's projects. Because government in many ways is a popularity contest. So you show up 1 versus 10, it can be hard. On a bureaucratic level, I think people understand what folks are going through, but not enough, because again, the education's not there. It's I was trained to do my job, which is a rules follower or a rules enforcer, not why do we truly have these zoning rules in the first place? It's to create a predictable path for people to develop. I said when I was in City Hall all the time, when I would get frustrated internally in meetings and go, the code book. The code book is not meant to keep you from developing. It's to show you and give you a path to develop. If the intent of the book was to say no all the time, there should be no book. It would just be one page that said you can't do anything. It's not what it's there for. And that seems to have flipped the script on a couple people on a couple projects. But again, we naturally, as humans, we go back to, we just want the status quo. And until people can really convince us, otherwise we're going to stay there. So City Hall needs to do a better job about understanding, but who's going to teach them? They're not going to figure it out tomorrow, especially if you have folks that have never been in a chair. They've never developed. They've never put their own money at risk. They've never fixed up a blighted property. They don't understand it because you're not telling the story. And I would encourage you guys to participate more and more and more. It's one of the reasons why we do our newsletter.
And what's the example of that? So let's say, hypothetically, we have a parcel that we're developing and the entire group shows up. It's 10 of us and then it's 10 neighbors. We know what the neighbors will potentially say. What should be our narrative? I know education is the objective, but we also don't want to, offend the other side at the same time. Ideally, how should we present that information and what should be said and when? Is it only at the city council meetings, at the neighborhood meetings? When should we say and what should we be saying as a group?
I think it's all across the board. If anybody's ever been through like a conditional use process, there's usually a meeting with neighbors earlier on in the project, and then there's a public meeting with, like, we're speaking about Orleans Parish, there's a city planning commission meeting, and then eventually there's a council meeting. Really, some of the earliest positions that people set themselves into are in those first meetings where it's just kind of neighbors. And that's when people are the most curious about a project. That's when folks could always use a little bit more support. There are rooms like this where they're after hours on a weekday and somebody's kind of defending or talking about their project, and 1 or 2 people start to kind of control that negative narrative. If you had a couple people in the room that were a bit friendlier, or that could talk some of the talking points about the positives of the project, I find it naturally tempers a room when you have even one person versus no people supporting a project, because people just don't pile on as much. And that's a normal meeting where people are asking just normal questions, not with an axe to grind. When you get to the public meetings, I think it's extremely important to start establishing positions on projects. And I've been encouraging different groups, some of the realtor groups, some of the realtor associations, and then I've been trying to get Tulane to do it, and I'm going to continue to try and get Tulane to do it because they're a bona fide third party that could be trustable for this, is starting to do, everybody in here has done a pro forma, they've done sheets. I'd love to have a third party vet projects to kind of check the numbers so that instead of talking about trash, noise, or parking, we could talk about jobs, taxes, and blight reduction. And that's what gets lost in the public conversation because it's too busy talking about trash, noise, and parking. And cars and parked cars are not doing anything good for this world. And they're not housing people, and they're not a car space on the street versus no car space on the street is not reducing blight in the city. Have you ever seen a parked car solve blight in a neighborhood? Anybody? No, nobody has. But yet that's what people are generally more focused on, because it's what they heard somebody else say at a meeting, and they heard somebody else say at the meeting, and people aren't talking about taxes, jobs, and blight reduction. And this city needs taxes, jobs, and blight reduction. But we're not saying it, and then we wonder why nobody's like listening to us, because we're not talking. So it would be all along the way at all those steps, putting out briefings, putting out one-pagers that people can read. How do you correct somebody's misinterpretation that a new fourplex on their block of all single-family homes is going to somehow bring their property value down? Does anybody think that a fourplex in a neighborhood filled with single families will bring their property value down?
Never thought of it.
Huh?
It does?
No, I'm asking. Does anybody think that? I don't think it does. I think it brings it up. More people. We know that more people in a smaller area brings it up. That's my position there. I would tell you the majority of the free world believes that you put anything other than single family homes next to single family homes, and everybody's property value goes down. Again, ask Manhattan, it doesn't work that way. But and they seem to have an economy that I think we would aspire to be at. I think, was it Brooklyn Bridge Park? The budget for Brooklyn Bridges Park is more than the city of New Orleans' budget. Their park, they get more funding than we do. So density seems to actually solve some problems in the world. But
what's some other role players? I know you can be our secret weapon with going to City Hall. What's some other role players that can help us support those positions and kind of condense the entire process of getting a project to the finish line?
I mean, it's everybody along the way. I mean, it starts with the project owner of not agreeing to kind of cut corners. A project owner who wants to set a rational, realistic timeline. And hey, if you started 2 weeks late for whatever reason, don't expect City Hall to make up your 2 weeks. Nobody at City Hall made you 2 weeks late if you started 2 weeks late. So, we certainly make our fair share of mistakes in the private sector. By no means am I trying to abdicate any sort of, non-perfection or imperfection with us. But we have, as we're getting to the end of our third year in the private sector, I think we're doing a much better job with our customers on all phases of here's what our actual timeline's going to be. If you want it to be faster than that, there's a 10% chance we can make that. But here's what a realistic expectation is going to be. Here's where we keep seeing conditional uses go off the rails. Here's where we're seeing the planners behind. And so setting those expectations early. The second part to that, though, and we're dealing with this with a project right now, the architects have missed every deadline. We're not the architects, so I get to pick on another company, which I won't name. They have missed every deadline we've had, and they've pushed the project back 4 months total. Because every time we have, in 3 weeks in advance, here's the deadline, can you please get us your stuff? Can't get it. Here's the deadline, can you please get your stuff? Can't get it. Here's the deadline. And so it just stretches these projects out. So it would be setting up that schedule early that's reasonable, and it would be especially for things where there's public deadlines. If this is a typical project that doesn't need these public hearings and whatnot, it's obviously going to condense it. Fewer variables is going to make this project faster and easier. But so many projects now require some sort of special review, design review, even if it's administrative. And if you miss those deadlines, you're completely off. The last I would say is, and I'm doing some cleanup on a project in the French Quarter where a contractor took it upon himself to go to City Hall on behalf of the property owner and go on, I think, a 10-minute tirade with one of the staff using all sorts of words that I can't say because I'm being recorded and there's a kid in the room, and somehow thought that kind of attitude was going to help. And I will tell you as a fact, it crushed the project by about 90 days.
Wow.
Because you had staff that wouldn't even talk to this guy. And ownership had to extricate this person and then, figure out who to bring on the team. And then they got us. And it was the first public meeting we had, I spent the first minute of my 2 minutes apologizing for somebody that I don't even know. I had nothing responsible, but I'm affiliated with that. I'm associated with that. You can't outrun your reputation. And in this town, everybody knows everybody. Yeah. I've worked with half of this room in some capacity, private sector and in my public world. You can't outrun your reputation. And so that's kind of that unwritten thing of just be nice to people. Your project will, again, you bring good energy in a city hall or in a business meeting, you bring it home with you, you bring it whatever, people are naturally nicer and they want to help you. You want to be mean to people, they're not going to be pleasant back.
Yeah. So as far as itemizing role players, so it starts with the property owner. And I'm talking about role players that can help us support getting projects to the finish line. If we can't get to you just yet. So property owners, who else could come in and support as far as
the architects?
Okay.
The architects. If you have contractors, this conversation came up earlier today. The amount of projects we take over, there's literally two folks where one I know is a future client and one is a current client. Contractors getting in over their skis. We go through this process to get something approved, and then it's like they never even remember those conversations. You got approval to do X, Y, and Z, and you ended up doing M, N, and L. And then you wonder why, oh wait, the city stopped me. They're gonna stop you. They're really good about stopping projects. They're getting better about it. They got more staff up there. And again, the negative, I always used to say, your neighbor is my best inspector. When I worked at City Hall, your neighbor is my best inspector, because they're gonna call on you very quick, especially if you're not on speaking terms or you killed their cat like 10 years ago. They remember and they will call. And so having that plan, but I see a lot of projects, they get through relatively quickly, but it's because there was this fictitious application. It wasn't a real request. I told them I was just gonna paint and change the carpet, and the termites, I found out the building had termites, and I tore off 90% of the house. You shouldn't even have asked for a permit. Trust me, you should always ask for a permit. You should always get a permit. But what's the point of getting a fictitious permit where you clearly didn't understand what the project was? So I see that happening a lot. And on the same thing with the contractors is, if somebody's on their 100th house, they're probably on their 20th subcontractor, maybe, You eventually get tired of people, or you realize they weren't as good for you as you thought they were, or they went off and did something else. The amount of people we come in to help later on in the game because their subcontractor told them they had permits and they never applied. There's onestop-app.nola.gov, for this. There's my permit now. You can check these permits. You can see if the applications are in. But the amount of professionals that phone it in and think like nobody's going to get it. So we're seeing people, they're working. An inspector shows up, they shut them down. Again, the delay on that crushes your project. If you're lucky, it just crushes your project. But a lot of times it's completely avoidable. Oh, you have that permit? Let me see a copy of it. Let me post it in the window. Let me see a copy of it. Let me post it in the window. And that's where just people are a little too trusting. We went to a job site this morning for a client, and it was the first thing the team came back to me with. It was an architecture project we did the permitting. And I couldn't remember, it had been so long because he hadn't started the project in a while. I couldn't remember if he actually had a permit. The first thing they came back was we didn't see a permit, and we looked it up. And it was like, oh, okay, we're good. We're good.
Just didn't print it.
But he just didn't print it. So we went back, it's a couple blocks away from the office, and we put one up for him. But people just skip those steps. And if you guys are in here, I think everybody in here is using their own money in some capacity, right? or they're going to lose money if their projects get stopped. And they just don't, they let their subcontractors be like cowboys running around like there's no rules. And the electric, I mean, anybody ever got a meter from Energy that didn't have an electrical permit that was inspected and completed? No? It was the greatest leverage we ever had in city government. You're going to get caught at the end. So plant the seeds early and you'll literally grow good things. But yeah, I think those would be the basics. Setting the timeline early, figuring out who all the players are going to be, then holding them accountable. Yeah. And back to the architects. I mean, look, everybody's got stuff to do, but if you know on your timeline, this is my deadline, I got to hold you accountable for it. So if people are continuously late, you know, like we just said, you'll find another architect, or you'll find another electrician, or you'll find somebody else, and that you'll figure out. Don't keep dead weight on your team.
Yeah, we're gonna take questions in a little bit, but I wanted to ask. So a lot of us are on the front end of purchasing properties, right? And blight is our target, and we run into code enforcement. We run into code enforcement liens. We run into SOAP costs with the tax sale costs and things like that. What are some things that, now, I don't want to use the word circumvent with government, but how could we manage, because we didn't create those liens, but we are bringing the opportunity to clear those up. Are there opportunities to get those reduced or eliminated in trying to purchase those properties? Because depending on who's working, you know, at the front desk at that particular time, it just depends on whether it be reduced, it'll be ignored, or it be eliminated. So from what you know with that dynamic with government and money's being owed to them, especially demolition liens because they paid for it, what should be our expectation with fines like that, where it seems like the government has the ability to just say, you know, we'll waive it, just prove that you can bring this project on? What should be our realistic expectation with liens like that?
I would look at lien money like it was, you're going to the casino with it. It's great if you leave with it still in your pocket type thing. Because it is a process that for some people, depending on the amount of the lien, it may not be worth your time. I know I was just talking with Anitra before. It took 4 trips, took 3 too many to get the lien off. But for that particular property, it was worth it. It was very justified. The city legally can take a lien off of any property. And especially one where you were not the reason why the lien got added. I think you have a 90% chance of success. So it's generally gonna happen.
How do we present that case? Because this is important, especially on the front end with acquisitions. How do we package that up?
So the best way is, if you have the ability to if time is your friend, is to essentially get everything fixed and finished, and then go ask for the lien reduction. If you don't, because I know most of the people in here are trying to fix something up so you can flip it, you're trying to line up that kind of blessing, that approval from the city, kind of as work's being wrapped up, because they generally don't look too favorable on the, oh, well, you're promising me that you're going to fix that, but we're going to take the lien off, because obviously you may decide not to pursue the project for X, Y, and Z reason. Now the lien's off, and now you have a more valuable piece of property. The thing that is generally there is early on in the project, and this is more hypothetical because we're just seeing it with communication breaking down. This is where the city there's no defense about the city not responding to a request. You know, hey, I have this question, I need to ask it to you. If it's not answered in 10 days, there's no defense of that. That's just a breakdown. But you should be able to, and this is how I would recommend it, you're making that request up front, saying, hey, hypothetically speaking, this is the lien. This is what we are, this is what we're planning to do with the property. Can you basically give me a preliminary green light that when I finish this process, you're gonna help do the paperwork, rather than, hey, I finished it and I need to sell this thing in 2 days and I need the lien off. That usually is just not going to play as well. Unfortunately, that's kind of how you have to do it, because for the first 2, 3, 4 attempts, they haven't gotten back to you. And it naturally gets you to where you're now in a crunch. But it would be something where you're getting something in writing early from the city or from any jurisdiction saying, yes, we agree in principle that if you go through and do X, Y, and Z, we're gonna be able to take that off, whether it's a rehearing or whether it's just straight up administrative paperwork. One of the reasons for that is just don't underestimate somebody leaving their job. And I talked to Sally 3 months ago. Well, Sally doesn't work here anymore. Do you have anything in writing? Oh no, it was that has been the greatest killer of people's progress. Again and again and again, is you talk to somebody on Monday, you talk to a different person on Tuesday, you talk to a different person on Wednesday, and by the time you get to Thursday, you hit that lottery or you're so agitated you give up on the request. So it's always trying to get some version of proof of that conversation once you've come to an agreement. Once you kind of have that, I think that goes a long way. Plus, it refreshes somebody's mind. I have that conversation in June. And in January, you're ready for that lien waiver. I forgot our conversation from 6 months ago. Oh no, here's that email. Remember, you've pre-approved it. Here's the pictures. I tore it down. Here's the proof. Here's the certificate of completion. Can you please help me with that paperwork? We've kind of pre-vetted it. We've been pre-checked. We've been pre-approved, if you will. I would go the pre-approval route as much as possible.
Gotcha. So just to clean that question up, I have a property under contract. The lender wants to see that, okay, let's say the property's under contract for $10,000. There's $20,000 in liens, and most of that is interest on grass liens. From what you're saying, don't expect to go in and get them waived, but just go in with the expectation of what your options are, or what should be my expectations to get it.
Well, you can have it always helps to have the specific open-ended kind of questions for your project.
Okay.
What would you be willing to do for me? And this is what I'm planning to do.
Okay.
But overall, if you were not the person who owned the property when the liens were put on, you have a very good chance of getting success at some point in the future, which is going to be potentially a complete wipe away of the liens. Because the city does want to see that blight reduction. They do want to see new construction. They want to see that property turn over. And the $1,400 or the $8,000 or the $12,000, yeah, the city wants that money. The city actually needs that money, but there is a benefit of having it flip over. And you talk about one of the loaded questions from earlier is, why aren't they understanding what we're doing? There actually are a lot of rules that play out to the favor of, hey, I'm the new person, I'm new to this street, I'm fixing up the property, can you help me get out of some of these penalties? Those things are on the books. The mechanics of them are just really wonky because, again, they're not taking the liens off until the property's been abated. And usually at the end of the project is when you need to hurry up and unload that or sell it, and you can't be involved in this process. It's a lot of timing. Yeah. So it would be a sharing that timeline with one of the folks in code enforcement and trying to get it locked into this pre-approval so you can come back.
Okay. We'll take questions right now. Marcel?
Thank you. My name is Marcel Rivera. I'm a developer. We do affordable housing, affordable rentals as well. Thank you for enlightening us. What I gathered from you is that our education is a massive problem, or lack thereof, about how City Hall works, how the Department of Safety works, how we should get more involved with the city. I bought some land in Algiers, some 3 years ago. I bought it cheap because they had 1,500 tires to remove, and I did it. And there was a lady, Kristen Palmer, maybe, city councilwoman, that saw me physically removing 1,500 tires, a lot of tires. I've done they charged me $2 per tire. I could only take 20 every day. It took me a year and a half to remove all the tires. But the reward of it is that just by cleaning up. I wonder what the city is going to do or is doing currently for this tire problem. It's all over the city. Maybe cameras, maybe this lady, Johnny Beth, have been wonderful work of expediting permits. We intend to continue hiring her and hiring you. So thank you.
Thank you. To get to your question about tires, I mean, it's proliferation of tires. You have a lot of folks from actually outside of Orleans Parish that will drive into Orleans, especially, I mean, it happens on the Westbank, but it happens a lot in the East. The East is plagued by folks. There's a lot of stretches where you can look both directions for half a mile, and not have anything, no lights, Old Gentilly Road, etc. It's been something that every new council person has been looking on. They've had some relative success with cameras in different spots and tracking people down. I know it's been in the news recently about some new state funding for more cameras and more kind of alerts to help notify the authorities to kind of catch that. I'll just say, you know, I tend not to hold back on some stuff. I'm very excited about any and all additional law enforcement coming into the city to help with any sorts of things like this, to just bring a little bit more law and order back into the city. I mean, right now, driving around, anybody notice? Everybody seems to run red lights, like actually stop for red lights and go through. The dumping, like there's just some basic mechanics of how a city works. The social contract really just isn't quite there. So, you know, and that comes down to also same thing with outreach. Like that's an angle where neighbors and homeowners and the development community can be in lockstep. Guys, dumping and trash and this sort of stuff is bad for both of our bottom lines. You know, finding those ways where, hey, we can do that. Trust me, somebody watches you, you know, and Kristen, did she stop you and talk to you? Yeah. She probably had a different appreciation for you. Now, she happens to be more on the development side than a lot of folks because she's developed her own properties for a long time. But there's a lot of folks in government that have never developed a property. And there's a lot of folks, again, they only see the side of Marcel when he shows up to get that conditional use for the bar, or, you know, I'm going to do whatever boogeyman anecdote. When somebody sees oh yeah, they're putting sweat into my neighborhood and they're making my neighborhood look better, it goes a long way. We're doing something in the Point right now. And one of the things that really got along was there was a lot of tires on a lot that somebody cleaned up long before he tried to go develop it. And those things pay dividends later, because there's some people, they weren't happy that there was going to be new stuff. And some folks were actually very excited, saying, I remember this guy, he cleaned up that corner and he's kept it cleaned up. And we don't want it going back, so we want to reward him with something. You got to put in the sweat, you got to put in the time, and it changes that. And the outreach, the education, I think it's fundamental. I think there's nothing in this country that can't be solved by giving people more books to read and educating them on topics. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, next question, Lance.
I know you've always been an advocate for the short-term rental situation, so I've seen you in that space. The direction that the city has gone in, it's a two-part question. What do you see the city going in with that, and how, as a group or as individuals, we can kind of speak up or advocate or, you know, kind of present in a different way? And then what is the difference between the traditional short-term rental versus how the city may label bread and breakfast that may be something that may have been around for a while? I've even heard of people starting their own new bread and breakfasts outside of taking a house and making a short-term rental. Is there separate rules and guidelines for that, or zoning or permit requirements to do that, as opposed to doing the traditional?
Okay. A lot of parts to kind of unpack there, but best answer for short-term rental is it's kind of everybody's guess. I can give you what my kind of hope and thought was. It was, and I won't hold back, it was the idea suggestion we had before they did the outright ban a year and a half ago. They had a couple of us, specifically Ron Lazel in my office. This was before Ron was even working with me directly under the Zach Smith flag. And another land use consultant, we had been lobbying folks to say, look, if you let everybody keep what they have and you come up with some caps, whether it be block face or block, whatever it is, and you basically just grandfather everybody in, you won't do overnight damage to people that have made that investment. And over time, you can get it to the number you want. And, I'm not the elected official, and that obviously wasn't followed, and there was the outright ban. And what I hope happens is that this judge carves out a way to protect the folks that, whether they're good actors or bad actors, that get to be protected because investments were made. Investments were made based on people, in many ways, following the rules. I fundamentally believe there are too many short-term rentals in the city of New Orleans. I think the fact that there's 6,000 plus in the city, Manhattan just did, they have a different constitution in the state of New York, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, we'll just keep it to the numbers. But they have less than 1,000 listings in Manhattan right now because of the new law that went into effect that has crazy teeth. The rules were not the thing holding short-term rentals back or allowing them to proliferate. It's the lack of enforcement of many rules. A lot of those enforcement mechanisms actually changed with the last set of rules, but they went to, basically wipe out people's property. Well, if you've invested $400,000 and you have every penny of your money tied into that, you have $400,000 reasons to break the rules. And unfortunately, that's between somebody eating or becoming homeless themselves or losing their investments, their kid, their legacy, their equity, whatever. It's created a potential for a lot of losers. And then there's kind of this less direct win by some people. I look at it and say if there were 6,000, I always try and go back to the numbers because it usually helps me justify what I say. As most statistics do for everybody. But there's roughly 15% of all short-term rentals are like the mom and pops, the true mom and pops. And 15% of 6,000 is a lot of people that I don't want to see get destroyed. I want to see a better way to enforce against the 85% to get them in line, get them right. They're illegally operating. First and foremost, throw them out. But somebody who went through, had the right permits in place and all that, it's absolutely unfair to take away what they had when they did it right and to say it's a privilege or a right or whatever, or it's tough luck, whatever. It's not presenting a business friendly face, which is the reason why a lot of people in this room probably are rightfully going, man, we're just being kind of attacked. So I hope that there's this middle ground. I literally hope they proverbially cut the kid in half and find a way to protect the folks that were already in that game at the expense of future people that may want to develop short-term rentals. But overall, I don't see a huge future for new legal short-term rental development. I don't see a situation where that happens. If the existing law stays on the books, obviously the majority of prime areas in town are already, we'll have a lottery system, which kind of already went through. So that's kind of already gone that direction. If they give it to where you're just grandfathered in, but there's allowed to be caps on blocks, it'll be potentially decades in some areas before you're able to do new short-term rentals. So if you're a short-term rental, that's how I want to make my money, especially legally, which I, again, always advise people, permits. They make your property way more valuable when you do it the right way up front. I don't think it's a great future, and it seems to be something that's going to continue to be scaled back. You had a separate part about bed and breakfast. So bed and breakfast, from the streets view and from a tourist view, they're the same damn thing. From a legal view and an operation view behind the scenes, they can be very much different. There's a long-standing history of bed and breakfast in the city of New Orleans in places, obviously before STR was 3 letters put together. And in most cases, you have to be owner occupied. You kind of always had to be owner occupied. But you legally you have a path forward on bed and breakfast now. We've done quite a few over the last year and a half. For what it's worth, when we saw the ban for STRs, we saw the writing on the wall, and we had quite a few people legally switch from short-term rental to bed and breakfast. And a bed and breakfast is something that's going to essentially be with you forever. Now, there's a lot of properties, they can't do it by right anymore. There's actually a citywide ban on bed and breakfast as well. But there's a appeal process for that. And again, anything that's not STNR generally are looked at less hostilely than SDRs. But overall, I think especially in residential areas, I don't think there's a strong future unless the federal judge not just throws it out, but then bars the city from doing something, which I don't think that's going to exactly happen. And we're expecting that any second. The prediction was that somehow the judge was waiting till after Mardi Gras because it would upset too many bookings and mess with too much money. So he was kind of being nice about it, but I mean, nobody seems to know. Nobody seems to know. So that helped answer those. Yes. So right now, if you were to go on that property.nola.gov website where you look up zoning, any property you pick, if you go on the right side, it's always got the assessor's information on the top left. You scroll down a little bit, you get to the zoning, and you scroll down a little bit more, and you get to all the overlays and the use restrictions, the special conditions. Every property in the city of New Orleans has an overlay for you can't have bed and breakfast, and every property in the city has one you can't have short-term rentals. They did that later. They realized, oh wait, there's this kind of gray area on bed and breakfast, so they went back and they banned that a couple months later. I want to say that was like January of 23, something like that. Corey, what's up? The rental registry. So it has changed quite a bit. Originally it was called Healthy Homes. Originally it was called the Rental Registry, and then they changed it to Healthy Homes. Because the alliterative H's apparently sounded better than the alliterative R's. But essentially it is properties of a certain size. Right now, by February 15th, which I guess is today, there was a deadline for, I think it's properties, structures with more than 50 units. And over the next 2 years, it will start phasing itself down to where I think originally it was going to be all rentals. And there was just too much pushback from that. And I got to go back and look, but I think it's down to 5-plex. I think it's 5-plexes and up. Now, I think 4-plexes are exempt. Well, the majority of renters in the city are in 2s, 3s, and 4s. So it exempts a lot of people. So there's a lot of housing advocates that are like, well, it's too watered down of rules. At the same time, there's a lot of bad property out there in doubles, in triples, and 4s that people should not be able to legally rent in. The flip side is the Willows and some of these large apartments. Those are the ones that truly make the news. The news isn't showing up to a random double on any street in the city saying this is bad condition. They're showing up to the 700-unit apartment building that, that pastor, I'm going to say it, should be in jail for how he's treated those people. Truly taking advantage of people. Yeah, they do. No, I mean, this is the reality of it. I think it's a $300,000 contract for a group to go inspect. Eventually the money comes from somewhere eventually, but they were working on hiring more people. And part of this is there's a potential to roll some of the STR enforcement if the STR rules get completely thrown out and never again, for the immediate future, if we're not going to do STR rules for a while, potentially shift some of those employees over to do some of these healthy home stuff. But yeah, if you own a rental portfolio, really anything above a 4-plex, you still got plenty of time before the smaller units go. But if anybody in here has 50-unit building, you're now late as of today. Good question. Yes, sir. Yeah. The future of senior living, I think from a macroeconomic standpoint, you can't miss. If you're in healthcare, if you're in anything dealing with like knee replacements, hip replacements, all that sort of stuff, we are. You got to look at the population growth thing, and it's. We need to fix some things. So there's a huge population of folks that are aging out, and they're wanting to get out of their homes because their homes are just too expensive. The insurance is crazy, and they need to get into something that's not even assisted. It just is earmarked to where it generally is. I think it's 55 and older, or 60 something. It's a really good strategy. The government will give you money to dedicate housing for seniors. It's also something that NIMBYs typically don't complain about too much, because the older the population, the fewer the cars. And obviously 80-year-olds typically aren't throwing ragers. So it tends to fit well next to a lot of things. And I see a lot of people with a lot of future, but there's only going to be more old people in our lifetimes than there were the generation before and the generation before, as we continue to kind of have fewer younger people and more older people. So I think it's a good future.
What would you say the most underutilized tools that the public has available for investors and people in general to do research other than property?
The underutilized resources was the question. What are some of the most underutilized resources? I would tell you, long before that city website got kind of calibrated, your plan reviewers and your city planners see all the trends before they're there. Because you're going, oh man, like everybody's in Gentilly right now, and you're putting it out there. Obviously, some of these city websites and these portals, like you can go see where all the zip codes of projects are. And there's some, it's not construction specifier, but you guys probably pay some of these third-party national groups to tell you trends about number of building permits and stuff like that. You don't? The city always turns that information monthly over to the census people for how many building permits and construction starts, but also there's a lot of third-party private companies that aggregate that data to try and show you trends. But it would be regularly having a conversation with the city planner or somebody in the permits office about, hey, can you give me the list of, and you can pull most of this stuff, you can, with a little bit of Excel knowledge, you can pull all this stuff. You can actually go on data.nola.gov and you can look up the building permits for the last 6 months. And then, it'll be with all the different fields, and you can get it by zip code, or you can figure out how to map that and see where the hot spots, who's buying, who's selling, who's flipping, who's whatever, what area is being left out that makes a lot of sense that maybe we should hit. I've been hot on 2 neighborhoods since I've been of the capacity to buy property. One is the area off of between Tulane and the interstate, which is now like short-term rental capital over there, across from the Dixie Brewery, across from the VA. That property I think is very lucrative. It's zoned MU2. It's zoned very well. You can put bars, you can do live entertainment, you can do all sorts of stuff right there. But people don't see it because it's stuck back there. The second is Holly Grove. I think Holly Grove is a fantastic opportunity. If you weren't from New Orleans and you looked at it, you have 2 golf courses that are possibly hitting Holly Grove with golf balls. Access to the interstate, access to airline, access to Earhart, access to the city, access to Mid-City, access to Broadmoor. Costco, for crying out loud, it's got everything. There's probably right now still 300 empty vacant lots, completely grassed over, ready to go. It's just so convenient. But it's obviously got a pre-Katrina reputation that, in my opinion, it's definitely outgrown. And I think it's missing. But it's that sort of stuff. I have an appreciation for Holly Grove not because I'm from here, because I worked in the permit office and you seeing different stuff and you're like, nothing's happening here. Why not? And you're seeing people that do develop in Holly Grove seem to make easy money because people go, it's not the same neighborhood it was 40 years ago. So I think regularly, don't take this as a buy-off thing, but find somebody in government who you can regularly converse with and go chat with them. Make it a once a quarter thing. Hey, I want to check in with you. Where are you seeing the activity? I would tell people that answer all the time. This is what I think. So
how can we get in touch with you, Zach?
You got a couple ways. And one thing that it's a new part of the company that we are launching is third-party inspections and third-party plan reviews. Third-party plan reviews. Don't have the city
Electric and plumbing on a third party? Okay.
Everything. Especially for projects that I know folks in this room are doing. We're starting off with the singles and doubles and triplexes, and then we're going up. We're waiting. That's pending a ordinance change. It's pending an ordinance change, but the ordinance is drafted and it's rolling. So you're seeing that future in 2024, the Zach Smith brand getting more and more involved with those sorts of things. How you get in touch with us, I'm going to pass out cards as we get out because I like to see everybody, talk to everybody. But easiest way to get me is to email me, Zach with an H at zachsmithconsulting.com. My cell phone on here, I've had the same cell phone number since I was 10. This cell phone number has been on every business card I've ever had, city government wise, and here. Don't think that you're abusing it. Text me, call. Text is way better. I'm a millennial. Text me before you call me. But I'm very happy to direct you where you need to go. Don't be surprised that I push you. I have essentially a dozen staff. I'm going to push you where you need to go. You might not always get me directly, but we're gonna take care of you one way or the other. But really appreciate the time. Any other questions before we jump in? Oh, Marcel.
I think mine was successful attracting dollars from Argentina and Uruguay lately. I always sell the city of New Orleans. I don't sell my house or my investment. Miami has been very, very successful at attracting dollars from South America. New Orleans, we have not even tapped that. I've been doing it at a very small level, been funding duplexes, in Algiers, in the places where I picked up the tires. Any tips about how to enhance the attraction of New Orleans as far as real estate?
I think there's a couple things. I really like that question because I'm going to have a lot of fun giving you my opinion on it. So COVID happens and the mayor in Miami puts up a series of billboards through Silicon Valley and in New York. And Miami has a lot of stuff going right for it at the time during COVID, beach scene outside. There's no place in the state of Florida that's more than 65 miles from open water, things like that. And I don't think, there's a couple hedge fund guys in Manhattan. They permanently relocated to Miami. There's a lot of money going to Miami. I don't think the billboards sold them so much as there's an elected leader in a place who's that committed to telling me where he stands or where she stands on the economy and on this, that they're going to go get billboards in my jurisdiction. And I think they're trying and they're doing that. And so you're seeing it. You're seeing for a whole lot of other reasons than just a gimmick with that. You're seeing companies leaving California to go to Texas. It certainly helps that those are two states with no state income tax. So it's easier to attract, versus California versus New York. It's there. But I think that one of the fundamental things, and this comes back to advocacy and education about what's going on, is our local leadership. I don't see a situation where there's anything outside of the normal, hey, we're trying to get, on a macroeconomic level, we're trying to get port dollars. We're trying to get more money for the port. I think getting money for the port is great. But why aren't we having this national or this international conversation about trying to get money to invest? One of the greatest things about short-term rentals, whether you love them or hate them, is the amount of money we stole from other states to bring here. The amount of, the evil New York, New Jersey investor, I say give us all your money. Give us all your money. We're so cheap down here, give us all your money. Same thing, you're making money in another country, you're making money in South America. How do we get it here? It's gonna naturally happen in this organic way with the Marcels of the world who know somebody who knows somebody. But all things considered, and here's where I'm gonna be real agitated and angry. When we do I can't curse, I love to curse in public. When we do one of these sister city trips, actually let's set up a real economic partnership. Let's set up hey, we want to promote X number of dollars being put together, shipped over here so we can invest it in blight reduction or do whatever. Not just I get a free first class ticket to a beach. There's got to be an actual structure behind it. The folks that are in the economic development department of the city of New Orleans, fantastic people. there's essentially 2 of them. When I go do work in Chattanooga, Tennessee, there's 10 of them. That's a city that's growing versus a city that's not. You can't have 2 people running all of the economic development opportunities and out there putting the best foot forward when between the 2 of them, they only have 4 feet and you got to be in 65 places. And we're too busy worried about when we spent 6 years trying to figure out Jazzland. That should have been 1 person working on that with 10 to 20 other people doing something else, working on that sister city partnership with some place in South America, working on something in Europe. I mean, Europe is doing relatively well. They got people that probably want to put their money somewhere else that's not in Europe, but we're doing these, little peace treaties with a country or a city we're not at war with that most of our population's never heard of. How do we put that into real world? Put up some billboards. Say we're actually open for business. Anybody that's been to a city council meeting? I mean, my biggest gripe in the world is people that sell Mardi Gras inspired pastries and call them king cakes. Which thank God we're over the trash that was sold this season. You can't put crawfish tails on bread and call it something king cake. You just can't. And a lot of people did that. But you have to have your foot out there. You can't phone it in. You can't say, oh yeah, we want to do this. And the gripe on the city council is if you go to a city council meeting, the first 2 hours is this congratulatory whatever. Get to business. Say, if we're going to be a business city first, if we're going to be a business first city, let's see the business actually happen first. Let's put up the billboards. Let's do right. Let's have people come to these meetings. Now, again, we have the responsibility to educate and re-educate and inform about what we want the talking points to be. But as soon as you get that done, then you got to hold the feet to the fire. Guys, we want to see X, Y, and Z, and we're not going to be happy until we see it.
Yep. Well, we appreciate the time, Zach. I know you're going to stick around for more questions, but everybody clap it up. Zach Smith. Steve is out of town. He normally does